Have you ever noticed when you finally rise above the manipulations of a narcissist, when you stop being controlled, stop being drained, and begin to stand quietly, unmistakably strong, they don't simply walk away. No, they strike. Not in fury at first, but in calculation. Not with truth, but with one last, carefully aimed deception, a dirty trick designed to pull you back into their shadow. Carl Jung wrote, "The brighter the light, the darker the shadow." There is a shape to that sentence, a warning and a map. When you grow brighter, clearer about who you are, firmer in your boundaries, steadier in your heart, the shadow that once hid behind charm will deepen its tactics. The narcissist's last resort is born from fear. They cannot tolerate the reflection of their own emptiness in your strength, and so they lash out, not to win, but to reassert a story in which they still matter. Imagine this for a moment. You have spent months learning to trust your judgment again. You have stopped answering every call in the night, stopped explaining yourself into exhaustion, stopped rearranging your life to fit someone else's fragile sense of control. You are calmer. You are learning who you are without them. Then, like a winter storm arriving after a long autumn, the smear begins. A text sent here, a rumor there, a subtle whisper that rewrites what others thought they knew about you. Why that particular tactic? Because when direct control fails, the narcissist turns to the social world, to reputation, to relationships, to the very frameworks people use to know one another. If they cannot make you small by taking from you directly, they will try to make you small by turning the world against you. But this is also their confession. Every smear, every invented slight, every attempt to split your circle is an admission. I cannot own you. I cannot fix what is broken within me, so I will try to break what you have built. Jung would have called this projection, dumping inner chaos onto an outer target and calling it truth. Listen closely. The last dirty trick is not powerful because it contains truth. It is powerful because it weaponizes people's quick judgments and the human tendency to prefer story over nuance. It moves fast where nuance moves slow. It preys on old social instincts, the need to belong, the fear of being wrong, the habit of taking one narrative and running with it. So what we will do in this video is not merely catalog the narcissist's tactic. We will trace the psychological anatomy behind them, the persona, the shadow, projection, and the rage that is really fear wrapped in charm. We will show you the pattern that always repeats and why it appears especially vicious when it meets someone who will no longer be controlled. And most importantly, we will give you the tools, practical, grounded, and Jungian in spirit, to respond with clarity instead of reactivity, with sovereignty rather than exhaustion. A final note before we go on. The ugliness of a smear campaign does not define you. It tries to, but it is only a narrative someone else wants you to inhabit. Jung's work asks us to reclaim the interior story. When you make the unconscious conscious, when you know who you are under pressure, the smear becomes background noise. It has form, but you have center. Now breathe. In the next segment, we will look at the narcissist's deepest fear, exposure, and how your strength becomes the mirror they cannot bear. We'll unpack the precise moment their tactics change, and why that shift always points back to one thing: their refusal to look inside. The narcissist's fear of strength. There is a moment in every relationship where the dynamic quietly rebalances. One person stops answering the scripts that once kept the other in control. The tone softens. The constant concessions stop. The defended one finds a center. Strength does not always roar. Often it arrives as a stillness, a refusal to be dragged into old patterns. For the narcissist, that stillness is not neutral. It is a mirror. Carl Jung taught us that every person carries a persona, the social mask, and a shadow, the denied, painful, unacceptable parts of the self. Narcissists invest everything in the persona. It's their currency, charm, superiority, performance. But behind the glitter of performance lies emptiness, shame, a terrifying sense of not enough. When you become steady, when you stop feeding the persona with attention, that fragile architecture trembles. Your strength forces their shadow into awareness, and they will not tolerate that without striking back. Imagine a vine trained around a trellis. As long as the trellis is there, it grows in a tidy, predictable way. Cut the trellis, and the vine either collapses or it must find its own shape. The narcissist depends on trellises, stories, roles, an audience. When you cut the trellis by claiming your truth, they lose control. The loss triggers panic, and panic becomes strategy. What form does that strategy take? First, it is projection. Jung observed that people throw their disowned qualities onto others to avoid facing them. The narcissist projects weakness, cruelty, incompetence onto you. If you are strong, they will call you brittle. If you are compassionate, they will call you manipulative. This projection is not random. It is selective and revealing. It tells you precisely which of their own shadows they cannot integrate. Second, there is escalation. When direct control, gaslighting, guilt, silent treatment stops working, they weaponize reputation and relationship. That last dirty trick is often social. Rumors, subtle character attacks, sowing doubt among friends and colleagues. It's efficient because humans prefer quick narrative. A whisper reaches further than a slow, nuanced truth. Consider a simple scene. You decide to stop answering midnight calls that always end in blame. You set a boundary, a calm text. I need space. The immediate reaction is bewilderment. When bewilderment does not work, the tactic shifts. They're being cold, someone says. I don't know what's wrong with them, another adds. A third person repeats a story that casts you in a negative light. Before long, you find yourself defending not just your choices but your character. The narcissist has moved the battlefield into the social field where nuance is rare and impressions stick. Why does this work for them? Because most people, pressured by sympathy and quick judgments, default to keeping the peace rather than investigating. The narcissist counts on that. They know that a single dramatic story will travel faster than a slow, careful explanation. They don't need to make you small by force. They just need to convince others that you are flawed. This, Jung would say, is the dark logic of the shadow. The more you deny a part of yourself, the more it will insist on being seen, by any means necessary. The narcissist's smear is a symptom of that insistence. It is a confession framed as attack. And yet there is a paradox we must hold. The smear is a demonstration of impotence, not of power. A calm, self-possessed person is proof of a narcissist's failure. Their attack is not the roar of a sovereign. It is the tantrum of someone who is losing a game they cannot understand. So how do you meet that moment without being undone? Jung's work points not to domination, but to integration and clarity. Here are practical modalities, grounded and humane, that disarm the smear without feeding it. Center before you respond. When a rumor arrives, the first move is inward. Breathe, document emotions, and don't rush to public rebuttal. Reacting in anger hands them the drama they crave. Collect facts quietly. Keep records of communications, dates, witnesses. Not because you want war, but because truth has weight when it must be weighed. Documentation protects your options later. Stabilize your circle. Share calmly with those you trust. True allies will listen, not rush to judgment. Your strongest defense is not argument, but consistent presence and character over time. Refuse the bait of moral argument on public platforms. Social media is the narcissist's amplifier. Each reply is oxygen. Choose channels that prioritize truth and depth. Private conversations, mediated settings, or legal help if necessary. Practice narrative economy. If you must respond, keep it brief and factual. A single clear statement that asserts boundaries and redirects energy into what matters: your work, your well-being, your relationship. Long defenses often become new battlegrounds. Invest in repair and growth. Ironically, one of the most disarming things you can do is to continue living richly. Deepen a craft, lean into therapy, strengthen habits. Your life is the most persuasive counter-narrative. And beyond tactics, there is the internal work Jung invites. Make the unconscious conscious. Study your triggers. Ask, what in me feels most threatened by this attack? Often, the narcissist's projection lands on our tenderest wound. When you recognize and heal that wound, the projection no longer wounds you in the same way. You become less reactive, more luminous. A few motivational truths to carry through the storm. Their story is not your identity. A rumor may circle, but it does not define the sum of you. Identity is built in private, in the choices you make when no one watches. Silence can be sovereignty. Choosing not to amplify a lie is not cowardice. It is mastery of attention. Time reveals coherence. People who really know you will see through a smear. Reputation is a long, slow wave. Lies are quick splash. Finally, remember Jung's quiet insistence that encountering shadow is part of the path to wholeness. The narcissist's attack, painful and ugly as it may be, is also an invitation to deepen your interior. You are offered a sharpened mirror. Look closely, integrate what needs integrating, strengthen your center, and move forward with more freedom. When the smear comes, respond as the person you are becoming. Calm, unborrowed by rage, fierce in your boundaries, compassionate where possible, and ruthless about your self-care when needed. In doing so, you do not just deflect a trick. You show a different mode of being, one that no smear can meaningfully touch. Segment 2. The last dirty trick. Smear, divide, destroy. The last dirty trick. Smear, divide, destroy. Almost equals 1,100 words. When control slips through their fingers, the narcissist reaches for one final weapon: the story. They know they've lost the direct hold over you. The emotional hooks no longer work. The guilt trips fall flat. The manipulation has been named, and that naming burns them like sunlight on a shadow. So, when they can't control the truth, they control the narrative. Carl Jung warned, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. The smear campaign is exactly that, an absurd theater, built to avoid the mirror of self-reflection. The anatomy of the last trick. It begins subtly. A whisper here, a suggestion there. They've changed. They're not who I thought they were. Something's off about them lately. Each word carries poison wrapped in care. Each tone, a quiet corrosion. Jung would call this projection at its peak, when the narcissist offloads their own insecurities, lies, and inner chaos, and paints them onto the canvas of your name. The smear is not a strategy of truth. It's a strategy of survival. Because when the narcissist's illusion collapses, they face an unbearable truth. They are ordinary. And to someone who's built their entire identity on superiority, that is annihilation. So they act out what Jung called the possession by the shadow. The darkness they refuse to face takes over, speaking through them, acting for them. They don't even fully realize what they're doing, only that they must destroy the reflection that revealed their emptiness. And you are that reflection. The tools of division: smear, divide, destroy. These are the three movements of the narcissist's final act. Let's look at them one by one. 1. Smear. They twist the narrative, casting themselves as the victim, and you as the ungrateful, unkind, or unstable one. Their stories are not outrageous lies. They're carefully constructed half-truths. Enough reality to sound plausible, enough distortion to make you unrecognizable. Suddenly, your compassion is rebranded as weakness. Your boundaries become cruelty. Your silence becomes proof of guilt. This is the genius of the smear. It is emotional alchemy, turning your virtues into weapons against you. 2. Divide. When the smear gains momentum, the narcissist targets your circle. Friends, family, colleagues. They whisper in ways that fracture loyalty. They'll make some people feel like they have to pick sides. They'll position themselves as the calm one, and you as the dramatic one. The goal is isolation, because an isolated target is easier to control. Divide the tribe, and the truth loses its audience. 3. Destroy. When isolation fails, the narcissist escalates. They might attack your credibility publicly, on social media, in workplaces, or within shared communities. If they cannot be admired, they will settle for being feared. If they cannot be loved, they will settle for being remembered, even as a villain. This, Jung might say, is the psyche's final descent into the shadow's possession. The ego, unable to sustain its inflated image, self-destructs while trying to preserve the illusion of control. The trap you must not fall into. The smear campaign feeds on one thing: your reaction. It wants you to explain, to defend, to shout your innocence to every corner. It wants you to bleed energy proving you are not what they say you are. Because the moment you defend yourself to their story, you are still playing inside their frame. Jung once said, "What you resist persists." And in this case, resisting the lie emotionally keeps it alive psychologically. So what should you do instead? You hold still. You act, not react. You live your truth consistently and quietly. Because the narcissist's smear is not sustainable, it collapses under the weight of its own contradiction. When someone's story doesn't match their behavior for long enough, people start noticing the crack. The truth always leaks through time. The higher path. This is where your real growth begins. The narcissist's last trick isn't just a test of endurance, it's a spiritual test of alignment. Can you remain anchored in who you are, even when your image is under siege? Can you keep your hands clean when provoked by filth? Can you stay centered in purpose when the world momentarily misunderstands you? That is the crucible of the empath's evolution. The empath's power isn't in winning arguments. It's in outlasting distortion through integrity. It's the quiet, unwavering posture that says, "You can twist the story, but you can't twist the truth. You can speak about me, but you can't speak for me." Each time you refuse to react to manipulation, you reclaim a part of yourself the narcissist once owned. Each moment of calm silence becomes an act of rebellion and healing. The psychological mastery. Let's decode the psychology one layer deeper. What happens when the narcissist's smear fails? They experience what Jung would describe as ego disintegration, a collapse of their false self. The persona can no longer mask the shadow. And when that happens, rage or despair take over. They may attempt one last emotional ambush, a sudden apology, an unexpected gift, a nostalgic message. But make no mistake, it's not reconciliation. It's reconnaissance. They want to see if the door is still open, if the supply can still be tapped. And when you ignore it, the silence will echo louder than any argument could. That silence, your silence, is the sound of a spell breaking, a word to the strong. When you've been smeared, isolated, and attacked, it's easy to question whether your compassion was a mistake. It wasn't. Your empathy was not the problem. It was the light that exposed theirs. Your forgiveness was not foolishness. It was grace they were unprepared to receive. Your strength was not aggression. It was the end of their illusion. So don't dim your light out of fear of attracting darkness. Instead, learn to see clearly, to love with boundaries, to give without depletion, to walk away without guilt. Because when you understand the narcissist's last trick, you stop being their victim and become their lesson. And that is the one story they cannot rewrite. Jung's advice. Facing the shadow without fear. The Jungian explanation. The shadow's collapse and the empath's awakening. Almost equals 1,300 words. Carl Jung believed that every human being is on a lifelong journey toward what he called individuation, the integration of the conscious and the unconscious, the persona and the shadow, the known and the hidden. To become whole, he said, you must first face what you've avoided. You must descend into the parts of yourself that frighten you, the anger, the fear, the grief, the desire to control, and bring them into the light of awareness. Most people never do this. They stay on the surface of their personality, polite, successful, socially acceptable. They polish the mask and call it identity. But underneath that mask, the shadow waits. And when the shadow is denied long enough, it doesn't disappear. It grows teeth. This is what happens to the narcissist. Their life becomes an elaborate act of avoidance, a fortress built to keep the shadow unseen. Every lie, every manipulation, every display of superiority is a desperate attempt to outrun that inner darkness. But the truth has gravity, and eventually life brings them face to face with someone they can't deceive, someone authentic, intuitive, deeply attuned to emotional undercurrents. That someone is often the empath. The collision. Jung wrote that the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. When the narcissist and empath meet, that reaction begins. The empath sees through the performance. They feel what the narcissist hides. Their presence alone unsettles the illusion. They bring warmth where there is pretense, understanding where there is manipulation, sincerity where there is strategy. And for a time, this fascinates the narcissist. They feed off it, they mirror it, they imitate depth, until the act becomes too heavy to sustain. Because the empath's energy doesn't just comfort, it reveals. And revelation is the narcissist's deepest fear. When their reflection in the empath's eyes no longer flatters them, they begin to unravel. The false self starts to crack. The shadow they've avoided, the insecurity, shame, and self-loathing, begins to seep through those cracks. The smear campaign, the manipulation, the rage, all of it is the shadow's last defense before collapse. They are not attacking your character. They are fighting for their illusion. The shadow's collapse. Jung described moments like these as psychic breakdowns, when the structure of the ego can no longer contain the unconscious forces pressing against it. The narcissist, unable to integrate their shadow, experiences it as an external threat, So they externalize the battle. They try to destroy what mirrors their brokenness instead of healing it. But in that destruction lies the seed of awakening, not for them, but for you. Because when you witness this collapse up close, you also meet your own shadow, the part of you that still wants to fix, to rescue, to prove your goodness through someone else's healing. That's the empath's shadow, the wound that says, if I love enough, I can save them. It's a beautiful illusion, but an exhausting one. True healing, Jung would say, begins when you let the narcissist's suffering stay theirs. When you realize that empathy without boundaries isn't compassion, it's self-erasure. The empath's awakening. So what happens when you finally stop chasing closure from someone who thrives on chaos? When you stop explaining your worth to someone committed to misunderstanding you? When you stop trying to be seen by someone who only looks for mirrors, never windows, something extraordinary occurs. The empath awakens. The energy that once went outward, trying to soothe, repair, or redeem, begins to turn inward. You start asking questions that mark the beginning of individuation. What does my peace look like when I'm not managing anyone else's emotions? Who am I when I'm not performing goodness for approval? What if my boundaries are not walls, but sacred doors? As you ask, the fragments begin to gather. The self you lost in the noise starts to take shape again. Jung would say this is the moment when the self, the deeper organizing principle of the psyche, begins to reassert itself. You no longer orbit someone else's gravity, you become your own sun. And here's the paradox. The very person who tried to break you ends up becoming your teacher. Not by wisdom, but by contrast. Their chaos becomes the mirror that forces you to discover inner order. Their lies push you toward radical honesty. Their control teaches you sovereignty. Their absence of empathy forces you to develop it for yourself. This is how suffering transforms into consciousness. The return to wholeness. When the empath fully awakens, the need to retaliate fades. You no longer crave validation from the narcissist or the world that believed their lies. You see the smear for what it is, a symptom of a deeper illness you can't cure for them. You stop trying to expose them and instead commit to expressing yourself. You stop trying to prove innocence and instead live in such integrity that the truth becomes self-evident. You stop trying to heal others, and in doing so, you finally heal yourself. Because the real victory isn't in destroying the narcissist. It's in refusing to become like them. Jung once said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." The empath's enlightenment is not gentle light, it's earned light. It comes from standing in darkness, learning its language, and emerging not bitter, but awake. A final reflection. Maybe this entire ordeal, the manipulation, the smear, the loss, wasn't punishment. Maybe it was initiation. Initiation into the deeper work of the soul. Into discernment, boundaries, and strength that doesn't need to shout. Carl Jung would remind you, the shadow is not your enemy. It is the soil of your becoming. And every time you face someone else's darkness with awareness instead of reaction, you grow in your own light. So let the narcissist play their last trick. Let them spin their web of words. Their story will fade. Your truth will not. Because when the dust settles, only one thing remains unshaken, the inner citadel you've built from every lesson, every scar, every awakening. And that citadel is you. Segment 4. Life advice and empowerment. So what should you do when the smear begins? Stay grounded in your truth. Do not let panic pull you into reaction. Silence at times is the loudest answer. Strengthen your circle. True allies will see through the lies. Trust that time reveals character. Jung said, "A lie would make no sense unless the truth were felt to be dangerous." Channel your energy into growth, not war. Remember, attention is food for the narcissist. Starve them. Instead, invest in your light, your craft, your healing. Because here's the real paradox. The last dirty trick is not proof of their power. It is proof of their powerlessness. It is the tantrum of a soul too afraid to look in the mirror. And when you rise above it, you don't just survive. You transcend. Outro. So the next time a narcissist tries one last trick, remember Jung's wisdom. Their smear is a shadow. It has no substance, no life of its own. Stand tall in your light. Know that your strength is not a threat, it is a mirror. And the ones who fear mirrors were never meant to walk beside you. Because in the end, the narcissist's greatest fear is not you. It is themselves.